2021. The moving, questing people were migrants now. Those families who had lived on a little piece of land, who had lived and died on 40 acres, had eaten or starved on the produce of 40 acres, had now the whole West to rove in. And they scampered about, looking for work, and the highways were streams of people, and the ditch banks were lines of people. Behind him more were coming. The great highways streamed with moving people. There in the middle, and southwest had lived a simple agrarian folk who had not changed with industry, who had not farmed with machines or known the power and danger of machines in private hands. They had not grown up in the paradoxes of industry. Their senses were still sharp to the ridiculousness of the industrial life. And then suddenly the machines pushed them out and they swarmed on the highways. The movement changed them, the highways, the camps along the road, the fear of hunger and the hunger itself, changed them. The children without dinner changed them, the endless moving changed them. They were migrants. And the hostility changed them, welded them, united them, hostility that made the little towns group and arm as though to repel an invader, squads with pick handles, clerks and storekeepers with shotguns, guarding the world against their own people. In the West there was panic when the migrants multiplied on the highways. Men of property were terrified for their property. Men who had never been hungry saw the eyes of the hungry. Men who had never wanted anything very much saw the flare of want in the eyes of the migrants. And the men of the towns and of the soft suburban country gathered to defend themselves, and they reassured themselves that they were good and the invaders bad, as a man must do before he fights. They said, "These goddamned Okais are dirty and ignorant. They're degenerate, sexual maniacs. Those goddamned Okais are thieves. They'll steal anything. They've got no sense of property rights." And the latter was true, for how can a man without property know the ache of ownership? And the defending people said, "They bring disease, they're filthy. We can't have them in the schools. They're strangers. How'd you like to have your sister go out with one of them?" The local people whipped themselves into a mold of cruelty. Then they formed units, squads, and armed them with clubs, with gas, with guns. "We own the country. We can't let these Okais get out of hand." And the men who were armed did not own the land, but they thought they did. And the clerks who drilled at night owned nothing, and the little storekeepers possessed only a drawer full of debts. But even a debt is something, even a job is something. The clerk thought, "I get $15 a week. S'pose a goddamn Okie would work for 12? And the little storekeeper thought, "How could I compete with a deadless man?" And the migrants streamed in on the highways and their hunger was in their eyes, and their need was in their eyes. They had no argument, no system, nothing but their numbers and their needs. When there was work for a man, 10 men fought for it, fought with a low wage. "If that fellow'll work for 30 cents, I'll work for 25. If he'll take 25, I'll do it for 20. No, me, I'm hungry. I'll work for 15. I'll work for food." The kids. You ought to see them. Little boils, like, comin' out, and they can't run around. Give them some windfall fruit, and they bloated up. Me, I'll work for a little piece of meat. And this was good, for wages went down and prices stayed up. The great owners were glad and they sent out more handbills to bring more people in. And wages went down and prices stayed up. And pretty soon now we'll have serfs again. And now the great owners and the companies invented a new method. A great owner bought a cannery. And when the peaches and the pears were ripe he cut the price of fruit below the cost of raising it. And as cannery owner he paid himself a low price for the fruit and kept the price of canned goods up and took his profit. And the little farmers who owned no canneries lost their farms, and they were taken by the great owners, the banks, and the companies who also owned the canneries. As time went on, there were fewer farms. The little farmers moved into town for a while and exhausted their credit, exhausted their friends, their relatives. And then they too went on the highways. And the roads were crowded with men ravenous for work, murderous for work. And the companies, the banks worked at their own doom and they did not know it. The fields were fruitful, and starving men moved on the roads. The granaries were full and the children of the poor grew up rachitic, and the pustules of pellagra swelled on their sides. The great companies did not know that the line between hunger and anger is a thin line. And money that might have gone to wages went for gas, for guns, for agents and spies, for blacklists, for drilling. On the highways the people moved like ants and searched for work, for food. And the anger began to ferment. 22. It was late when Tom Joad drove along a country road looking for the Wed Patch Camp. There were few lights in the countryside. Only a sky glare behind showed the direction of Bakersfield. The truck jiggled slowly along and hunting cats left the road ahead of it. At a crossroad there was a little cluster of white wooden buildings. Ma was sleeping in the seat and Pa had been silent and withdrawn for a long time. Tom said, "I don't know where she is. Maybe we'll wait till daylight," and asked somebody. He stopped at a boulevard signal and another car stopped at the crossing. Tom leaned out. "Hey, mister. Know where the big camp is at?" "Straight ahead." Tom pulled across into the opposite road. A few hundred yards, and then he stopped. A high wire fence faced the road, and a wide gated driveway turned in. A little way inside the gate there was a small house with a light in the window. Tom turned in. The whole truck leaped into the air and crashed down again. "Jesus," Tom said. "I didn't even see that hump." A watchman stood up from the porch and walked to the car. He leaned on the side. "You hit her too fast," he said. "Next time you'll take it easy." "What is it, for God's sake?" The watchman laughed. "Well, a lot of kids play in here. You tell folks to go slow and they're liable to forget. But let 'em hit that hump once and they don't forget." "Oh. Yeah. Hope I didn't break nothin'. Say, you got any room here for us?" "Got one camp." "How many of you?" Tom counted on his fingers. "Me and Pa and Ma, Alan Rosa Sharn Uncle John and Ruthie and Winfield. Them last is kids." "Well, I guess we can fix you. Got any camping stuff?" "Got a big tarp and beds." The watchman stepped up on the running board. "Drive down the end of that line and turn right. You'll be in number 4 sanitary unit." "What's that?" "Toilets and showers and wash tubs." Ma demanded. "You got wash tubs, running water?" "Sure." "Oh. Praise God," said Ma. Tom drove down the long dark row of tents. In the sanitary building a low light burned. "Pull in here," the watchman said. "It's a nice place. Folks that had it just moved out." Tom stopped the car. "Right there?" "Yeah. Now you let the others unload while I sign you up. Get to sleep. The camp committee'll call on you in the morning and get you fixed up." Tom's eyes drew down. "Cops?" he asked. The watchman laughed. "No cops. We got our own cops. Folks here elect their own cops. Come along." Al dropped off the truck and walked around. "Gonna stay here?" "Yeah," said Tom. "You and Pa unload while I go to the office." "Be kinda quiet," the watchman said. "They's a lot of folks sleeping." Tom followed through the dark and climbed the office steps and entered a tiny room containing an old desk and a chair. The guard sat down at the desk and took out a form. "Name?" "Tom Joad." "That your father?" "Yeah." "His name?" "Tom Joad, too." The questions went on. "Where from, how long in the state, what work done?" The watchman looked up. "I'm not nosy. We got to have this stuff." "Sure," said Tom. "Now, got any money?" "Little bit." "You ain't destitute?" "Got a little." "Why?" "Well, the campsite costs $1 a week, but you can work it out, carrying garbage, keeping the camp clean, stuff like that." "We'll work it out," said Tom. "You'll see the committee tomorrow. They'll show you how to use the camp and tell you the rules." Tom said, "Say, what is this? What committee is this, anyways?" The watchman settled himself back. "Works pretty nice. There's 5 sanitary units. Each one elects a central committee man. Now that committee makes the laws. What they say goes. Suppose they get tough," Tom said. "Well, You can vote 'em out you as quick as you vote 'em in. They've done a fine job. Tell you what they did, the holy roller preachers all the time follow the people around, preachin' and talking up collections? Well, they wanted to preach in this camp. And a lot of the older folks wanted them. So it was up to the Central Committee. They went into meeting and here's how they fixed it. They say, any preacher can preach in this camp. Nobody can take up a collection in this camp. And it was kinda sad for the old folks, 'cause there hasn't been a preacher in since. Tom laughed and then he asked, you mean to say the fellas that runs the camp is Jew fellas, camp in here? Sure. And it works. You said about cops, Central Committee keeps order and makes rules. Then there's the ladies. They'll call on your ma. They keep care of kids and look after the sanitary units. If your ma isn't working, she'll look after kids for the ones that is working, and when she gets a job, why, there'll be others. They sew, and a nurse comes out and teaches 'em. All kinds of things like that. You mean to say they ain't no cops? No, sir. No cop can come in here without a warrant. Well, s'pose a fella is Jew mean, or drunk and quarrelsome. What then? The watchman stabbed the blotter with a pencil. Well, the first time the Central Committee warns him. And the second time they really warn him. The third time they kick him out of the camp. God almighty, I can't hardly believe it. Tonight the deputies and them fellas with the little caps, they burned the camp out by the river. They don't get in here, the watchman said. Some nights the boys patrol the fences, specially dance nights. Dance nights? Jesus Christ. We got the best dances in the county every Saturday night. Well, for Christ's sake. Why ain't they more places like this? The watchman looked sullen. You'll have to find that out yourself. Go get some sleep. Good night, said Tom. Ma's gonna like this place. She ain't been treated decent for a long time. Good night, the watchman said. Get some sleep. This camp wakes up early. Tom walked down the street between the rows of tents. His eyes grew used to the starlight. He saw that the rows were straight and that there was no litter about the tents. The ground of the street had been swept and sprinkled. From the tents came the snores of sleeping people. The whole camp buzzed and snorted. Tom walked slowly. He neared number 4 sanitary unit and he looked at it curiously, an unpainted building, low and rough. Under a roof, but open at the sides, the rows of wash trays. He saw the Joe truck standing nearby, and went quietly toward it. The tarpaulin was pitched and the camp was quiet. As he drew near, a figure moved from the shadow of the truck and came toward him. Ma said softly, "That you, Tom?" "Yeah. SH." she said. "They're all asleep. They was tired out." "You ought to be asleep too," Tom said. "Well, I wanted to see ya. Is it alright?" "It's nice," Tom said. "I ain't gonna tell ya. They'll tell ya in the mornin'. Ya gonna like it." She whispered, "I heard they got hot water." "Yeah. Now, you get to sleep. I don't know when you slept last." She begged, "What ain't you gonna tell me?" "I ain't. You get to sleep." Suddenly she seemed girlish. "How can I sleep if I got to think about what you ain't gonna tell me?" "No, you don't," Tom said. "First thing in the mornin' you get on your other dress and then, you'll find out. I can't sleep with nothin' like that hangin' over me." "You got to," Tom chuckled happily. "You got to. Good night," she said softly, and she bent down and slipped under the dark tarpaulin. Tom climbed up over the tailboard of the truck. He lay down on his back on the wooden floor and he pillowed his head on his crossed hands, and his forearms pressed against his ears. The night grew cooler. Tom buttoned his coat over his chest and settled back again. The stars were clear and sharp over his head. It was still dark when he awakened. A small clashing noise brought him up from sleep. Tom listened and heard again the squeak of iron on iron. He moved stiffly and shivered in the morning air. The camp still slept. Tom stood up and looked over the side of the truck. The eastern mountains were blue-black, and as he watched, the light stood up faintly behind them, colored at the mountain rims with a washed red, then growing colder, grayer, darker, as it went up overhead, until at a place near the western horizon it merged with pure night. Down in the valley the earth was the lavender gray of dawn. The clash of iron sounded again. Tom looked down the line of tents, only a little lighter gray than the ground. Beside a tent he saw a flash of orange fire seeping from the cracks in an old iron stove. Gray smoke spurted up from a stubby smoke pipe. Tom climbed over the truck side and dropped to the ground. He moved slowly toward the stove. He saw a girl working about the stove, saw that she carried a baby on her crooked arm, and that the baby was nursing, its head up under the girl's shirtwaist. And the girl moved about, poking the fire, shifting the rusty stove lids to make a better draft, opening the oven door, and all the time the baby sucked, and the mother shifted it deftly from arm to arm. The baby didn't interfere with her work or with the quick gracefulness of her movements. And the orange fire licked out of the stove cracks and threw flickering reflections on the tent. Tom moved closer. He smelled frying bacon and baking bread. From the east the light grew swiftly. Tom came near to the stove and stretched out his hands to it. The girl looked at him and nodded, so that her two braids jerked. "Good mornin'," she said, and she turned the bacon in the pan. The tent flap jerked up and a young man came out and an older man followed him. They were dressed in new blue dungarees and in dungaree coats, stiff with filler, the brass buttons shining. They were sharp-faced men, and they looked much alike. The young man had a dark stubble beard and the older man a white stubble beard. Their heads and faces were wet, their hair dripped, water stood in drops on their stiff beards. Their cheeks shone with dampness. Together they stood looking quietly into the lightening east. They yawned together and watched the light on the hill rims. And then they turned and saw Tom. "Mornin'," the older man said, and his face was neither friendly nor unfriendly. "Mornin'," said Tom. And, "Mornin'," said the younger man. The water slowly dried on their faces. They came to the stove and warmed their hands at it. The girl kept to her work. Once she set the baby down and tied her braids together in back with a string, and the two braids jerked and swung as she worked. She set tin cups on a big packing box, set tin plates and knives and forks out. Then she scooped bacon from the deep grease and laid it on a tin platter, and the bacon cricked and rustled as it grew crisp. She opened the rusty oven door and took out a square pan full of big high biscuits. When the smell of the biscuits struck the air both of the men inhaled deeply. The younger said, "Key wrist." Softly. Now the older man said to Tom, "Had your breakfast?" "Well, no, I ain't. But my folks is over there. They ain't up. Need the sleep." "Well, set down with us, then. We got plenty, thank God." "Why, thank ya," Tom said. "Smells so darn good I couldn't say no." "Don't she?" the younger man asked. "Ever smell anything so good in your life?" They marched to the packing box and squatted around it. "Workin' around here?" the young man asked. "Aim to," said Tom. "We'd you got in last night. Ain't had no chance to look around." "We had 12 days' work," the young man said. The girl, working by the stove, said, "They even got new clothes." Both men looked down at their stiff blue clothes, and they smiled a little shyly. The girl set out the platter of bacon and the brown, high biscuits and a bowl of bacon gravy and a pot of coffee, and then she squatted down by the box too. The baby still nursed, its head up under the girl's shirtwaist. They filled their plates, poured bacon gravy over the biscuits, and sugared their coffee. The older man filled his mouth full, and he chewed and gulped and swallowed. "God Almighty, it's good," he said, and he filled his mouth again. The younger man said, "We been eatin' good for 12 days now. Never missed a meal in 12 days, none of us. Workin' and gettin' our pay and eatin'." He fell to again, almost frantically, and refilled his plate. They drank the scalding coffee and threw the grounds to the earth and filled their cups again. There was color in the light now, a reddish gleam. The father and son stopped eating. They were facing to the east and their faces were lighted by the dawn. The image of the mountain and the light coming over it were reflected in their eyes. And then they threw the grounds from their cups to the earth, and they stood up together. "Got to get going," the older man said. The younger turned to Tom. "Looky," he said. "We're laying some pipe. If you want to walk over with us, maybe we could get you on." Tom said, "Well, that's mighty nice of you. And I sure thank you for the breakfast." "Glad to have you," the older man said. "We'll try to get you workin' if you want." "You goddamn right I want," Tom said. "Ju wait a minute. I'll tell my folks." He hurried to the Jode tent and bent over and looked inside. In the gloom under the tarpaulin he saw the lumps of sleeping figures. But a little movement started among the bedclothes. Ruthie came wriggling out like a snake, her hair down over her eyes and her dress wrinkled and twisted. She crawled carefully out and stood up. Her gray eyes were clear and calm from sleep, and mischief was not in them. Tom moved off from the tent and beckoned her to follow, and when he turned, she looked up at him. "Lord God, you're growing up," he said. She looked away in sudden embarrassment. "Listen here," Tom said. "Don't you wake nobody up, but when they get up, you tell 'em I got a chance at a job, and I'm a-going for it. Tell Ma I at breakfast with some neighbors. You hear that?" Ruthie nodded and turned her head away, and her eyes were little girl's eyes. "Don't you wake 'em up," Tom cautioned. He hurried back to his new friends. And Ruthie cautiously approached the sanitary unit and peeked in the open doorway. The two men were waiting when Tom came back. The young woman had dragged a mattress out and put the baby on it while she cleaned up the dishes. Tom said, "I wanted to tell my folks where I was. They wasn't awake." The three walked down the street between the tents. The camp had begun to come to life. At the new fires the women worked, slicing meat, kneading the dough for the morning's bread. And the men were stirring about the tents and about the automobiles. The sky was rosy now. In front of the office a lean old man raked the ground carefully. He so dragged his rake that the tine marks were straight and deep. "You're out early, Pa," the young man said as they went by. Yep. Got to make up my rent." "Rent, hell," the young man said. He was drunk last Saturday night. Sung in his tent all night. Committee give him work for it. They walked along the edge of the oiled road. A row of walnut trees grew beside the way. The sun shoved its edge over the mountains. Tom said, "Seems funny. I've et your food, and I ain't told you my name, nor you ain't mentioned yours. I'm Tom Jode." The older man looked at him, and then he smiled a little. "You ain't been out here long?" "Hell, no. Ju a couple days." "I knowed it. Funny, you get out of the habit to mention in your name they's so goddamn many. Just fellas. Well, sir, I'm Timothy Wallace, and this here's my boy Wilkie." "Proud to know ya," Tom said. "You been out here long?" 10 months, Wilkie said. "Got here right on the tail o' the floods last year. Jesus. We had a time. Goddamn near starved to death." Their feet rattled on the oiled road. A truckload of men went by, and each man was sunk into himself. Each man braced himself in the truck bed and scowled down. "Going out for the gas company," Timothy said. "They got a nice job of it." "I could have took our truck," Tom suggested. "No." Timothy leaned down and picked up a green walnut. He tested it with his thumb and then shied it at a blackbird sitting on a fence wire. The bird flew up, let the nut sail under it, and then settled back on the wire and smoothed its shining black feathers with its beak. Tom asked, "Ain't you got no car?" Both Wallaces were silent, and Tom, looking at their faces, saw that they were ashamed. Wilkie said, "Place we work at is only a mile up the road." Timothy said angrily, "No, we ain't got no car. We sold our car. Had to. Run out of food, run out of everything. Couldn't get no job. Fellas come around every week, buying cars. Come around, and if you're hungry, why, they'll buy your car. And if you're hungry enough, they don't have to pay nothing for it. And we was hungry enough. Give us $10 for her." He spat into the road. Wilkie said quietly, "I was in Bakersfield last week. I seen her, settin' in a used car lot, settin' right there, $75 was the sign on her." "We had to," Timothy said. "It was either us let 'em steal our car or us steal somethin' from them. We ain't had to steal yet, but, goddamn it, we been close." Tom said, "You know, 'fore we left home, we heard they was plenty work out here. Seen handbills, us kin folks to come out." "Yeah," Timothy said. "We seen 'em too. And they ain't much work. And wages is comin' down all the time. I get so goddamn tired you figurin' how to eat." "You got work now," Tom suggested. "Yeah, but it ain't gonna last long. Workin' for a nice fella. Got a little place. Works longside of us. But, hell, it ain't gonna last no time." Tom said, "Why in the hell you gonna get me on? I'll make it shorter." "What you cuttin' your own throat for?" Timothy shook his head slowly. "I dunno. Got no sense, I guess. We figured to get us each a hat. Can't do it, I guess. There's the place, off to the right there. Nice job, too. Gettin' 30 cents an hour. Nice friendly fella to work for." They turned off the highway and walked down a graveled road, through a small kitchen orchard, and behind the trees they came to a small white farmhouse, a few shade trees, and a barn, behind the barn a vineyard and a field of cotton. As the three men walked past the house a screen door banged, and a stocky sunburned man came down the back steps. He wore a paper sun helmet, and he rolled up his sleeves as he came across the yard. His heavy sunburned eyebrows were drawn down in a scowl. His cheeks were sunburned a beef red. "Mornin', Mr. Thomas," Timothy said. "Morning." The man spoke irritably. Timothy said, "This here's Tom Joad. We wondered if you could see your way to put him on?" Thomas scowled at Tom. And then he laughed shortly, and his brows still scowled. "Oh, sure. I'll put him on. I'll put everybody on. Maybe I'll get 100 men on." "We'd you thought," Timothy began apologetically. Thomas interrupted him. "Yes, I've been thinkin' too." He swung around and faced them. "I've got some things to tell you. I've been paying you 30 cents an hour, that right?" "Why, sure, Mr. Thomas, and I've been getting 30 cents worth of work." His heavy hard hands clasped each other. "We try to give a good day of work. Well, goddamn it, this morning you're getting 25 cents an hour, and you take it or leave it." The redness of his face deepened with anger. Timothy said, "We've give you good work. You said so yourself." "I know it. But it seems like I ain't hiring my own men anymore." He swallowed. "Look," he said. "I got 65 acres here. Did you ever hear of the Farmers Association?" "Why, sure. Well, I belong to it. We had a meeting last night. Now, do you know who runs the Farmers Association?" "I'll tell you. The Bank of the West. That bank owns most of this valley, and it's got paper on everything it don't own. So last night the member from the bank told me, he said, you were paying 30 cents an hour. You'd better cut it down to 25. I said, I've got good men. They're worth 30. And he says, it isn't that, he says. The wage is 25 now. If you pay 30, it'll only cause unrest. And by the way, he says, you going to need the usual amount for a crop loan next year? Thomas stopped. His breath was panting through his lips. You see? The rate is 25 cents, and like it. We done good work, Timothy said helplessly. Ain't you got it yet? Mr. Bank hires 2,000 men and I hire 3. I've got paper to meet. Now if you can figure some way out, by Christ, I'll take it. They got me. Timothy shook his head. I don't know what to say. You wait here. Thomas walked quickly to the house. The door slammed after him. In a moment he was back, and he carried a newspaper in his hand. Did you see this? Here, I'll read it. Citizens, angered at red agitators, burn squatters' camp. Last night a band of citizens, infuriated at the agitation going on in a local squatters' camp, burned the tents to the ground and warned agitators to get out of the county. Tom began, "Why, and then he closed his mouth and was silent. Thomas folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. He had himself in control again. He said quietly, "Those men were sent out by the association. Now I'm giving 'em away. And if they ever find out I'm old, I won't have a farm next year." "I don't know what to say," Timothy said. "If they was agitators, I can see why they was mad." Thomas said, "I watched it a long time. There's always red agitators just before a pay cut. Always. God damn it, they got me trapped. Now, what are you going to do?" 25 cents. Timothy looked at the ground. "I'll work," he said. "Me too," said Wilkie. Tom said, "Seems like I walked into something." "Sure, I'll work. I got to work." Thomas pulled a bandana out of his hip pocket and wiped his mouth and chin. "I don't know how long it can go on. I don't know how you men can feed a family on what you get now." "We can while we work," Wilkie said. "It's when we don't get work." Thomas looked at his watch. "Well, let's go out and dig some ditch." "By God," he said, "I'm gonna tell you. You fellas live in that government camp, don't you?" Timothy stiffened. "Yes, sir. And you have dances every Saturday night?" Wilkie smiled. "We sure do. Well, look out next Saturday night." Suddenly Timothy straightened. He stepped close. "What you mean?" "I belong to the Central Committee. I got to know." Thomas looked apprehensive. "Don't you ever tell I told." "What is it?" Timothy demanded. "Well, the association don't like the government camps. Can't get a deputy in there. The people make their own laws, I hear, and you can't arrest a man without a warrant. Now if there was a big fight and maybe shooting, a bunch of deputies could go in and clean out the camp." Timothy had changed. His shoulders were straight and his eyes cold. "What you mean?" "Don't you ever tell where you heard," Thomas said uneasily. "There's going to be a fight in the camp Saturday night. And there's going to be deputies ready to go in." Tom demanded, "Why, for God's sake? Those folks ain't bothering nobody." "I'll tell you why," Thomas said. "Those folks in the camp are getting used to being treated like humans. When they go back to the squatters' camps they'll be hard to handle." He wiped his face again. "Go on out to work now. Jesus, I hope I haven't talked myself out of my farm. But I like you people." Timothy stepped in front of him and put out a hard lean hand, and Thomas took it. "Nobody won't know who tall. We thank you. They won't be no fight. Go on to work," Thomas said. "And it's 25 cents an hour." "We'll take it," Wilkie said, "from you." Thomas walked away toward the house. "I'll be out in a piece," he said. "You men get to work." The screen door slammed behind him. The three men walked out past the little whitewashed barn, and along a field edge. They came to a long narrow ditch with sections of concrete pipe lying beside it. "Here's where we're a-workin'," Wilkie said. His father opened the barn and passed out 2 picks and 3 shovels. And he said to Tom, "Here's your beauty." Tom hefted the pick. "Jumping Jesus. If she don't feel good." "Wait till about 11 o'clock, Wilkie suggested. "See how good she feels then." They walked to the end of the ditch. Tom took off his coat and dropped it on the dirt pile. He pushed up his cap and stepped into the ditch. Then he spat on his hands. The pick rose into the air and flashed down. Tom grunted softly. The pick rose and fell, and the grunt came at the moment it sank into the ground and loosened the soil. Wilkie said, "Yes, sir, Pa. We got here a first-grade muckstick man. This here boy been married to that there little digger." Tom said, "I put in time, "Yes, sir, I sure did, "Put in my years, "Kinda like the feel, The soil loosened ahead of him. The sun cleared the fruit trees now and the grape leaves were golden green on the vines. 6 feet along and Tom stepped aside and wiped his forehead. Wilkie came behind him. The shovel rose and fell and the dirt flew out to the pile beside the lengthening ditch. "I heard about this here Central Committee," said Tom. "So you're one of 'em?" "Yes, sir," Timothy replied. "And it's a responsibility. All them people. We're doing our best. The people in the camp doing their best. I wish them big farmers wouldn't plague us so. I wish they wouldn't." Tom climbed back into the ditch and Wilkie stood aside. Tom said, "How about this fight, at the dance, he tall about, What they want to do that for?" Timothy followed behind Wilkie, and Timothy's shovel beveled the bottom of the ditch and smoothed it ready for the pipe. "Seems like they got to drive us," Timothy said. "They're scared we'll organize, I guess. And maybe they're right. This here camp is a organization. People there look out for theirselves. Got the nicest string band in these parts. Got a little charge account in the store for folks that's hungry. $5, you can get that much food and the camp'll stand good. We ain't never had no trouble with the law. I guess the big farmers is scared of that. Can't throw us in jail, why, it scares 'em. Figure maybe if we can govern ourselves, maybe we'll do other things." Tom stepped clear of the ditch and wiped the sweat out of his eyes. "You hear what that paper said 'bout agitators up north of Bakersfield?" "Sure," said Wilkie. "They do that all the time. Well, I was there. They wasn't no agitators. What they call Reds. What the hell is these Reds anyways?" Timothy scraped a little hill level in the bottom of the ditch. The sun made his white bristlebeard shine. "They's a lot of fellas want to know what Reds is." He laughed. "One of our boys found out." He patted the piled earth gently with his shovel. "Fella named Hines, got 'bout 30,000 acres, peaches and grapes, got a cannery and a winery. Well, he's all a time talking about them goddamn Reds. Goddamn Reds is driving the country to ruin, he says, and we got to drive these here red bastards out. Well, they were a young fella you come out west here, and he's listening one day. He kinda scratched his head and he says, 'Mr. Hines, I ain't been here long. What is these goddamn Reds?' Well, sir, Hines says, 'A Red is any son of a bitch that wants 30 cents an hour when we're paying 25. Well, this young fella he thinks about her, and he scratches his head, and he says, 'Well, Jesus, Mr. Hines. I ain't a son of a bitch, but if that's what a Red is, why, I want 30 cents an hour. Everybody does. Hell, Mr. Hines, we're all Reds.'" Timothy drove his shovel along the ditch bottom, and the solid earth shone where the shovel cut it. Tom laughed. "Me too, I guess." His pick arced up and drove down, and the earth cracked under it. The sweat rolled down his forehead and down the sides of his nose, and it glistened on his neck. "Damn it," he said, "a pick is a nice tool, if you don't fight it, You and the pick, working together, In line, the three men worked, and the ditch inched along, and the sun shone hotly down on them in the growing morning. When Tom left her, Ruthie gazed in at the door of the sanitary unit for a while. Her courage was not strong without Winfield to boast for. She put a bare foot in on the concrete floor, and then withdrew it. Down the line a woman came out of a tent and started a fire in a tin camp stove. Ruthie took a few steps in that direction, but she could not leave. She crept to the entrance of the Jode tent and looked in. On one side, lying on the ground, lay Uncle John, his mouth open and his snores bubbling spittily in his throat. Ma and Pa were covered with a comfort, their heads in, away from the light. Al was on the far side from Uncle John, and his arm was flung over his eyes. Near the front of the tent rows of Sharon and Winfield lay, and there was the space where Ruthie had been, beside Winfield. She squatted down and peered in. Her eyes remained on Winfield's tow head, and as she looked, the little boy opened his eyes and stared out at her, and his eyes were solemn. Ruthie put her finger to her lips and beckoned with her other hand. Winfield rolled his eyes over to rows of Sharon. Her pink-flushed face was near to him, and her mouth was open a little. Winfield carefully loosened the blanket and slipped out. He crept out of the tent cautiously and joined Ruthie. How long you been up?" he whispered. She led him away with elaborate caution, and when they were safe, she said, "I never been to bed. I was up all night." "You was not," Winfield said. "You're a dirty liar." "Alright," she said. "If I'm a liar, I ain't gonna tell you nothin' that happened. I ain't gonna tell how the fella got killed with a stab knife and how they was a bear come in and took off a little chili." "They wasn't no bear," Winfield said uneasily. He brushed up his hair with his fingers and he pulled down his overalls at the crotch. "All right, they wasn't no bear," she said sarcastically. "And they ain't no white things made out of dish stuff, like in the catalogs." Winfield regarded her gravely. He pointed to the sanitary unit. "In there?" he asked. "I'm a dirty liar," Ruthie said. "It ain't gonna do me no good to tell stuff to you." "Let's go look," Winfield said. "I already been," Ruthie said. "I already sat on 'em. I even peed in one." "You never neither," said Winfield. They went to the unit building, and that time Ruthie was not afraid. Boldly she led the way into the building. The toilets lined one side of the large room, and each toilet had its compartment with a door in front of it. The porcelain was gleaming white. Hand basins lined another wall, while on the third wall were 4 shower compartments. "There," said Ruthie. "Them's the toilets. I seen 'em in the catalog." The children drew near to one of the toilets. Ruthie, in a burst of bravado, boosted her skirt and sat down. "I tol' you I been here," she said. And to prove it, there was a tinkle of water in the bowl. Winfield was embarrassed. His hand twisted the flushing lever. There was a roar of water. Ruthie leaped into the air and jumped away. She and Winfield stood in the middle of the room and looked at the toilet. The hiss of water continued in it. "You done it," Ruthie said. "You went and broke it." "I seen you." "I never." "Honest, I never." "I seen you," Ruthie said. "You Jew ain't to be trusted with no nice stuff." Winfield sunk his chin. He looked up at Ruthie and his eyes filled with tears. His chin quivered. And Ruthie was instantly contrite. "Never you mind," she said. "I won't tell on you. We'll pretend like she was already broke. We'll pretend we ain't even been in here." She led him out of the building. The sun leapt over the mountain by now, shone on the corrugated iron roofs of the 5 sanitary units, shone on the gray tents and on the swept ground of the streets between the tents. And the camp was waking up. The fires were burning in camp stoves, in the stoves made of kerosene cans and of sheets of metal. The smell of smoke was in the air. Tent flaps were thrown back and people moved about in the streets. In front of the Jode tent Ma stood looking up and down the street. She saw the children and came over to them. "I was worryin'," Ma said. "I didn't know where you was." "We was Jew lookin'," Ruthie said. "Well, where's Tom? You seen him?" Ruthie became important. "Yes, ma'am. Tom, he got me up and he told me what to tell you." She paused to let her importance be apparent. "Well, what?" Ma demanded. "He said tell you." She paused again and looked to see that Winfield appreciated her position. Ma raised her hand, the back of it toward Ruthie. "What?" "He got work," said Ruthie quickly. "Went out to work." She looked apprehensively at Ma's raised hand. The hand sank down again, and then it reached out for Ruthie. Ma embraced Ruthie's shoulders in a quick convulsive hug, and then released her. Ruthie stared at the ground in embarrassment, and changed the subject. "They got toilets over there," she said. "White ones." "You been in there?" Ma demanded. "Me and Winfield," she said, and then, treacherously, "Winfield, he bust a toilet." Winfield turned red. He glared at Ruthie. "She peed in one," he said viciously. Ma was apprehensive. "Now what did you do?" "You show me." She forced them to the door and inside. "Now what did you do?" Ruthie pointed. It was a hissin' and a swishin'. "Stop now." "Show me what you done," Ma demanded. Winfield went reluctantly to the toilet. "I didn't push it hard," he said. "I drew head out of this here, and the swish of water came again." He leaped away. Ma threw back her head and laughed, while Ruthie and Winfield regarded her resentfully. That's the way she works, Ma said. I seen them before. When you finish, you push that. The shame of their ignorance was too great for the children. They went out the door, and they walked down the street to stare at a large family eating breakfast. Ma watched them out of the door. And then she looked about the room. She went to the shower closets and looked in. She walked to the wash basins and ran her finger over the white porcelain. She turned the water on a little and held her finger in the stream, and jerked her hand away when the water came hot. For a moment she regarded the basin, and then, setting the plug, she filled the bowl a little from the hot faucet, a little from the cold. And then she washed her hands in the warm water, and she washed her face. She was brushing water through her hair with her fingers when a step sounded on the concrete floor behind her. Ma swung around. An elderly man stood looking at her with an expression of righteous shock. He said harshly, "How you come in here?" Ma gulped, and she felt the water dripping from her chin, and soaking through her dress. "I didn't know," she said apologetically. "I thought this here was for folks to use." The elderly man frowned on her. "For men folks," he said sternly. He walked to the door and pointed to a sign on it, "Men." "There," he said. "That proves it. Didn't you see that?" "No," Ma said in shame, "I never seen it. Ain't they a place where I can go?" The man's anger departed. "You'd you come?" he asked more kindly. "Middle of the night," said Ma. "Then you ain't talked to the committee?" "What committee?" "Why, the ladies' committee." "No, I ain't," he said proudly. "The committee'll call on you pretty soon and fix you up. We take care of folks that do come in. Now, if you want a ladies' toilet, you do go on the other side of the building." "That side's yourn," Ma said uneasily. "You say a ladies' committee, come into my tent?" He nodded his head. "Pretty soon, I guess." "Thank ya," said Ma. She hurried out, and half ran to the tent. "Pa," she called. "John, get up. You, Al. Get up and get washed." Startled sleepy eyes looked out at her. "All of you," Ma cried. "You get up and get your face washed. Uncomb your hair." Uncle John looked pale and sick. There was a red bruised place on his chin. Pa demanded, "What's the matter?" "The committee," Ma cried. "They's a committee, a ladies' committee a comin' to visit. Get up now, and get washed." And while we was sleepin' and snorin', Toms went out and got work. "Get up, now." They came sleepily out of the tent. Uncle John staggered a little, and his face was pained. "Get over to that house and wash up," Ma ordered. "We got to get breakfast and be ready for the committee." She went to a little pile of split wood in the camp lot. She started a fire and put up her cooking irons. "Pone," she said to herself. "Pone and gravy. That's quick. Got to be quick." She talked on to herself, and Ruthie and Winfield stood by, wondering. The smoke of the morning fires arose all over the camp, and the mutter of talk came from all sides. Rose of Sharon, unkempt and sleepy-eyed, crawled out of the tent. Ma turned from the cornmeal she was measuring in fistfuls. She looked at the girl's wrinkled dirty dress, at her frizzled uncombed hair. "You got to clean up," she said briskly. "Go right over and clean up. You got a clean dress." "I washed it." "Get your hair combed. Get the seeds out your eyes." Ma was excited. Rose of Sharon said sullenly, "I don't feel good. I wished Connie would come. I don't feel like doin' nothin' 'thout Connie." Ma turned full around on her. The yellow cornmeal clung to her hands and wrists. "Rosa Sharon," she said sternly, "you get up right. You been mopin' enough. They's a ladies' committee a comin', and the fambly ain't gonna be frowny when they get here." "But I don't feel good." Ma advanced on her, mealy hands held out. "Git," Ma said. "They's times when how you feel got to be kept to yourself." "I'm a-goin' to vomit," Rose of Sharon whined. "Well, go and vomit. Course you're gonna vomit. Everybody does. Get it over and then you clean up, and you wash your legs and put on them shoes of yourn." She turned back to her work. "Unbraid your hair," she said. A frying pan of grease sputtered over the fire, and it splashed and hissed when Ma dropped the pan in with a spoon. She mixed flour with grease in a kettle and added water and salt and stirred the gravy. The coffee began to turn over in the gallon can, and the smell of coffee rose from it. Pa wandered back from the sanitary unit, and Ma looked critically up. Pa said, "Yes, say Tom's got work?" "Yes, sir. Went out 'fore we was awake. Now look in that box and get you some clean overalls and a shirt." "Pa, I'm awful busy. You get in Ruthie and Winfield's ears. They's hot water. Will you do that? Scrounge around in their ears good, and their necks. Get 'em red and shinin'." "Never seen you so bubbly," Pa said. Ma cried, "This here's the time the family got to get decent. Comin' across they wasn't no chance at. But now we can. Throw your dirty overalls in the tent and I'll wash 'em out." Pa went inside the tent, and in a moment he came out with pale blue, washed overalls and shirt on. And he led the sad and startled children toward the sanitary unit. Ma called after him, "Scrounge around good in their ears." Uncle John came to the door of the men's side and looked out, and then he went back and sat on the toilet a long time and held his aching head in his hands. Ma had taken up a panload of brown pone and was dropping spoons of dough in the grease for a second pan when a shadow fell on the ground beside her. She looked over her shoulder. A little man dressed all in white stood behind her, a man with a thin, brown, lined face and merry eyes. He was lean as a picket. His white clean clothes were frayed at the seams. He smiled at Ma. "Good morning," he said. Ma looked at his white clothes and her face hardened with suspicion. "Mornin'," she said. "Are you Mrs. Jode?" "Yes. Well, I'm Jim Raleigh. I'm camp manager. Just dropped by to see if everything's all right. Got everything you need?" Ma studied him suspiciously. "Yes," she said. Raleigh said, "I was asleep when you came last night. Lucky we had a place for you." His voice was warm. Ma said simply, "It's nice. 'Specially them wash tubs. You wait till the women get to washing. Pretty soon now. You never heard such a fuss. Like a meeting. Know what they did yesterday, Mrs. Jode? They had a chorus. Singing a hymn tune and rubbing the clothes all in time. That was something to hear, I tell you." The suspicion was going out of Ma's face. "Must 'a been nice. You're the boss?" "No," he said. "The people here worked me out of a job. They keep the camp clean, they keep order, they do everything. I never saw such people. They're making clothes in the meeting hall. And they're making toys. Never saw such people." Ma looked down at her dirty dress. "We ain't clean yet," she said. You can't keep clean travelin'." "Don't I know it," he said. He sniffed the air. "Say, is that your coffee smells so good?" Ma smiled. "Does smell nice, don't it? Outside it always smells nice." And she said proudly, "We'd take it in honor if you'd have some breakfast with us." He came to the fire and squatted on his hams, and the last of Ma's resistance went down. "We'd be proud to have ya," she said. "We ain't got much that's nice, but you're welcome." The little man grinned at her. "I had my breakfast. But I'd sure like a cup of that coffee. Smells so good." Why, sure. Don't hurry yourself." Ma poured a tin cup of coffee from the gallon can. She said, "We ain't got sugar yet. Maybe we'll get some today. If you need sugar, it won't taste good." "Never use sugar," he said. "Spoils the taste of good coffee." "Well, I like a little sugar," said Ma. She looked at him suddenly and closely, to see how he had come so close so quickly. She looked for motive on his face, and found nothing but friendliness. Then she looked at the frayed seams on his white coat, and she was reassured. He sipped the coffee. "I guess the ladies'll be here to see you this morning." "We ain't clean," Ma said. "They shouldn't be comin' till we get cleaned up a little." "But they know how it is," the manager said. "They came in the same way." "No, sir. The committees are good in this camp because they do know." He finished his coffee and stood up. "Well, I got to go on. Anything you want, why, come over to the office. I'm there all the time. Grand coffee. Thank you. He put the cup on the box with the others, waved his hand, and walked down the line of tents. And Ma heard him speaking to the people as he went. Ma put down her head and she fought with a desire to cry. Pa came back leading the children, their eyes still wet with pain at the air scrounging. They were subdued and shining. The sunburned skin on Winfield's nose was scrubbed off. There, Pa said. Got dirt in 2 layers of skin. Had to almost lick 'em to make 'em stand still. Ma praised them. They look nice, she said. Hep yourself to pone and gravy. We got to get stuff out of the way and the tent in order. Pa served plates for the children and for himself. Wonder where Tom got work? I dunno. Well, if he can, we can. Al came excitedly to the tent. What a place. He said. He helped himself and poured coffee. Know what a fella's doin'? He's buildin' a house trailer. Right over there, back a them tents. Got beds and a stove, everything. D'you live in her? By God, that's the way to live. Right where you stop, that's where you live. Ma said, I ruther have a little house. Soon's we can, I want a little house. Pa said, Al, after we've et, you and me and Uncle John'll take the truck and go out lookin' for work. Sure, said Al. I like to get a job in a garage if there's any jobs. That's what I really like. And get me a little old cut-down Ford. Paint her yellow and go a canoodlin' around. Seen a purty girl down the road. Give her a big wink, too. Purty as hell, too. Pa said sternly, you better get you some work 'fore you go a tomcattin'. Uncle John came out of the toilet and moved slowly near. Ma frowned at him. You ain't washed, she began, and then she saw how sick and weak and sad he looked. You go on in the tent and lay down, she said. You ain't well. He shook his head. No. He said. I sinned, and I got to take my punishment. He squatted down disconsolately and poured himself a cup of coffee. Ma took the last pones from the pan. She said casually, the manager of the camp come and sat and had a cup of coffee. Pa looked over slowly. Yeah? What's he want already? D'you come to pass the time, Ma said daintily. D'you sat down and had coffee. Said he didn't get good coffee so often, and smell tarrin. What did he want? Pa demanded again. Didn't want nothin'. Come to see how he was gettin' on. I don't believe it, Pa said. He's probably a snootin' and a smellin' around. He was not. Ma cried angrily. I can tell a fella that's snootin' around quick as the next person. Pa tossed his coffee grounds out of his cup. You got to quit that, Ma said. This here's a clean place. You see she don't get so goddamn clean a fella can't live in her, Pa said jealously. Hurry up, Al. We're going out lookin' for a job. Al wiped his mouth with his hand. I'm ready, he said. Pa turned to Uncle John. You a comin'? Yes, I'm a comin'. You don't look so good. I ain't so good, but I'm comin'. Al got in the truck. Have to get gas, he said. He started the engine. Pa and Uncle John climbed in beside him and the truck moved away down the street. Ma watched them go. And then she took a bucket and went to the wash trays under the open part of the sanitary unit. She filled her bucket with hot water and carried it back to her camp. And she was washing the dishes in the bucket when Rose of Sharon came back. I put your stuff on a plate, Ma said. And then she looked closely at the girl. Her hair was dripping and combed, and her skin was bright and pink. She had put on the blue dress printed with little white flowers. On her feet she wore the heeled slippers of her wedding. She blushed under Ma's gaze. You had a bath, Ma said. Rose of Sharon spoke huskily. I was in there when a lady come in and done it. Know what you do? You get in a little stall like, and you turn handles, and water comes a floodin' down on you, hot water or cold water, d'you like you want it, and I done it. I'm a goin' to myself, Ma cried. D'you soon as I get finished here. You show me how. I'm a gonna do it every day, the girl said. That lady, she seen me, and she seen about the baby, and, know what she said? Said they's a nurse comes every week. And I'm to go see that nurse and she'll tell me Jew what to do so's the baby'll be strong. Says all the ladies here do that. And I'm gonna do it. The words bubbled out. An, know what? Last week they was a baby born and the whole camp give a party, and they give clothes, and they give stuff for the baby, even give a baby buggy, wicker one. Wasn't new, but they give it a coat of pink paint, and it was Jew like new. And they give the baby a name, and had a cake. Oh, Lord. She subsided, breathing heavily. Ma said, praise God, we come home to our own people. I'm gonna have a bath. Oh, it's nice, the girl said. Ma wiped the tin dishes and stacked them. She said, we're Jodes. We don't look up to nobody. Grandpa's grandpa, he fit in the revolution. We was farm people till the debt. And then, them people. They done somethin' to us. Every time they come seemed like they was whippin' me, all of us. In needles, that police. He done somethin' to me, made me feel mean. Made me feel ashamed. And now I ain't ashamed. These folks is our folks, is our folks. And that manager, he come and sat and drank coffee, and he says, Mrs. Jode this, and Mrs. Jode that, and how you gettin' on, Mrs. Jode? She stopped and sighed, why, I feel like people again. She stacked the last dish. She went into the tent and dug through the clothes box for her shoes and a clean dress. And she found a little paper package with her earrings in it. As she went past Rose of Sharon, she said, if them ladies comes, you tell 'em I'll be right back. She disappeared around the side of the sanitary unit. Rose of Sharon sat down heavily on a box and regarded her wedding shoes, black patent leather untailored black bows. She wiped the toes with her finger and wiped her finger on the inside of her skirt. Leaning down put a pressure on her growing abdomen. She sat up straight and touched herself with exploring fingers, and she smiled a little as she did it. Along the road a stocky woman walked, carrying an apple box of dirty clothes toward the wash tubs. Her face was brown with sun, and her eyes were black and intense. She wore a great apron, made from a cotton bag, over her gingham dress, and men's brown Oxfords were on her feet. She saw that Rose of Sharon caressed herself, and she saw the little smile on the girl's face. So, she cried, and she laughed with pleasure. What you think it's gonna be? Rose of Sharon blushed and looked down at the ground, and then peeked up, and the little shiny black eyes of the woman took her in. I don't know, she mumbled. The woman plopped the apple box on the ground. Got a live tumor, she said, and she cackled like a happy hen. Which you Ruther? She demanded. I dunno, boy, I guess. Sure, boy. You'd you come in, didn't you? Last night, late. Gonna stay? I don't know. If we can get work, guess we will. A shadow crossed the woman's face, and the little black eyes grew fierce. If you can get work. That's what we all say? My brother got a job already this morning. Did, huh? Maybe you're lucky. Look out for luck. You can't trust luck. She stepped close. You can only get one kind of luck. Can't have more. You be a good girl, she said fiercely. You be good. If you got sin on you, you better watch out for that there baby. She squatted down in front of Rose of Sharon. They's scandalous things goes on in this here camp, she said darkly. Ever Saturday night they's dancin', and not only square dancin', neither. They's some does clutch and hug dancin'. I seen 'em. Rose of Sharon said guardedly, I like dancin', square dancin'. And she added virtuously, I never done that other kind. The brown woman nodded her head dismally, well, some does. And the Lord ain't lettin' it get by, neither, and on you think he is. No, ma'am, the girl said softly. The woman put one brown wrinkled hand on Rose of Sharon's knee, and the girl flinched under the touch. You let me warn you now. They ain't but a few deep down Jesus lovers left. Ever Saturday night when that there string band starts up and should be a playin' hymnody, they're a reelin', yes, sir, a reelin'. I seen 'em. Won't go near, myself, nor I don't let my Ken go near. They's clutch and hug, I tell ya. She paused for emphasis and then said, in a hoarse whisper, "They do more. They give a stage play." She backed away and cocked her head to see how Rose of Sharon would take such a revelation. "Actors?" the girl said in awe. "No, sir." The woman exploded. "Not actors, not them already damn people. Our own kind of folks. Our own people. And they was little children didn't know no better, in it, and they was pretendin' to be stuff they wasn't. I didn't go near. But I hearn 'em talkin' what they was doin'. The devil was struttin' through this here camp." Rose of Sharon listened, her eyes and mouth open. "Onct in school we give a Christchilly play, Christmas. Well, I ain't sayin' that's bad or good. They's good folks thinks a Christchilly is alright. But, well, I wouldn't care to come right out flat and say so. But this here wasn't no Christchilly. This here was sin and delusion and devil stuff. Struttin' and paradin' and speakin' like they're somebody they ain't. And dancin' and clutchin' and ahin'." Rose of Sharon sighed. Not you a few, neither," the brown woman went on. "Get in so's you can almost count the deep down lamb blood folks on your toes. And on you think them sinners is puttin' nothin' over on God, neither. No, sir, he's chalkin' 'em up sin by sin, and he's drawin' his line and addin' 'em up sin by sin. God's watchin', and I'm watchin'. He's already smoked 2 of 'em out." Rose of Sharon panted, "Has?" The brown woman's voice was rising in intensity. "I seen it. Girl carryin' a little one, just like you. And she play acted, and she hug danced." And the voice grew bleak and ominous. "She thinned out and she skinnied out, and she dropped that baby, dead. Oh, my." The girl was pale. Dead and bloody. Course nobody wouldn't speak to her no more. She had to go away. Can't take sin 'thout catchin' it. No, sir. And there was another, done the same thing. And she skinnied out, and, know what? One night she was gone. 2 days, she's back. Says she was visitin'. But, she ain't got no baby. Know what I think? I think the manager, he took her away to drop her baby. He don't believe in sin. Told me hisself. Says the sin is bein' hungry. Says the sin is bein' cold. Says, I tell ya, he told me hisself, can't see God in them things. Says them girls skinnied out 'cause they didn't get enough food. Well, I fixed him up." She rose to her feet and stepped back. Her eyes were sharp. She pointed a rigid forefinger in Rose of Sharon's face. "I says, get back. I says, I knowed the devil was rampagin' in this here camp. Now I know who the devil is. Get back, Satan, I says." And, by Chris he got back. Tremblin' he was, and sneaky. Says, please. Says, please don't make the folks unhappy. I says, unhappy? How about their soul? How about them dead babies and them poor sinners ruined count of play actin'? He just looked, and he give a sick grin and went away. He knowed when he met a real testifier to the Lord. I says, I may help in Jesus watch the goin's on. And you and them other sinners ain't getting away with it. She picked up her box of dirty clothes. You take heed. I warned you. You take heed that poor chilly in your belly and keep out of sin. And she strode away titanically, and her eyes shone with virtue. Rose of Sharon watched her go, and then she put her head down on her hands and whimpered into her palms. A soft voice sounded beside her. She looked up, ashamed. It was the little white-clad manager. "Don't worry," he said. "Don't you worry." Her eyes blinded with tears. "But I done it," she cried. "I hug danced. I didn't tell her. I done it in Sisaw. Me and Connie." "Don't worry," he said. "She says I'll drop the baby. I know she does. I kind of keep my eye on her. She's a good woman, but she makes people unhappy." Rose of Sharon sniffled wetly. She knowed 2 girls lost their baby right in this here camp. The manager squatted down in front of her. "Look," he said. "Listen to me. I know them too. They were too hungry and too tired. And they worked too hard. And they rode on a truck over bumps. They were sick. It wasn't their fault. But she said, "Don't worry. That woman likes to make trouble. But she says you was the devil." "I know she does. That's because I won't let her make people miserable." He patted her shoulder. "Don't you worry. She doesn't know." And he walked quickly away. Rose of Sharon looked after him, his lean shoulders jerked as he walked. She was still watching his slight figure when Ma came back, clean and pink, her hair combed and wet, and gathered in a knot. She wore her figured dress and the old cracked shoes, and the little earrings hung in her ears. "I done it," she said. "I stood in there and let warm water come a floodin' and a flowin' down over me. And they was a lady says you can do it every day if you want." "Ann, them ladies committee come yet?" "Uh-uh," said the girl. "And you just sat there and didn't read up the camp none." Ma gathered up the tin dishes as she spoke. "We got to get in shape," she said. "Come on, stir. Get that sack and kinda sweep along the ground." She picked up the equipment, put the pans in their box and the box in the tent. "Get them beds neat," she ordered. "I tell ya, I ain't never felt nothin' so nice as that water." Rose of Sharon listlessly followed orders. "You think Connie'll be back today?" "Maybe, maybe not. Can't tell." "You sure he knows where at to come?" "Sure." "Ma, you don't think they coulda killed him when they burned?" "Not him," Ma said confidently. "He can travel when he wants, Jackrabbit quick and Fox sneaky. I wished he'd come." "He'll come when he comes." "Ma, I wished you'd get to work." "Well, do you think dancin' and play actin' is sins and'll make me drop the baby?" Ma stopped her work and put her hands on her hips. "Now what you talkin' about? You ain't done no play actin'." "Well, some folks here done it, and one girl, she dropped her baby, dead, and bloody, like it was a judgment." Ma stared at her. "Who tol' you?" "Lady that come by. And that little fella in white clothes, he come by and he says that ain't what done it." Ma frowned. "Rosa Sharn," she said, "you stop pickin' at yourself. You're just teasin' yourself up to cry. I don't know what's come at you. Our folks ain't never did that. They took what come to 'em dry-eyed. I bet it's that Connie give you all them notions. He was just too big for his overhauls." And she said sternly, "Rosa Sharn, you're just one person, and they's a lot of other folks. You get to your proper place. I knowed people built their self up with sin till they figured they was big mean shucks in the sight o' the Lord. But, Ma, no. Just shut up and get to work. You ain't big enough or mean enough to worry God much. And I'm gonna give you the back my hon if you don't stop this pickin' at yourself." She swept the ashes into the fire hole and brushed the stones on its edge. She saw the committee coming along the road. "Get workin'," she said. "Here's the ladies comin'. Get a workin' now, so's I can be proud." She didn't look again, but she was conscious of the approach of the committee. There could be no doubt that it was the committee, 3 ladies, washed, dressed in their best clothes, a lean woman with stringy hair and steel-rimmed glasses, a small stout lady with curly gray hair and a small sweet mouth, and a mammoth lady, big of hock and buttock, big of breast, muscled like a dray horse, powerful and sure. And the committee walked down the road with dignity. Ma managed to have her back turned when they arrived. They stopped, wheeled, stood in a line. And the great woman boomed, "Mornin', Miss Jode, ain't it?" Ma whirled around as though she had been caught off guard. "Why, yes, yes. How'd you know my name?" "We're the committee," the big woman said. "Ladies' Committee of Sanitary Unit Number 4. We got your name in the office." Ma flustered, "We ain't in very good shape yet. I'd be proud to have you ladies come and sit while I make up some coffee." The plump committee woman said, "Give our names, Jessie. Mention our names to Miss Jode." "Jessie's the chair," she explained. Jessie said formally, "Miss Jode, this here's Annie Littlefield and Ella Summers, and I'm Jessie Bullitt." "I'm proud to make your acquaintance," Ma said. "Won't you set down?" "They ain't nothin' to set on yet," she added. "But I'll make up some coffee." "Oh, no," said Annie formally. "Don't put yourself out. We just come to call and see how you was, and try to make you feel at home. Jessie Bullitt said sternly. Annie, I'll thank you to remember I'm chair. Oh. Sure, sure. But next week I am. Well, you wait till next week then. We change every week, she explained to Ma. Sure you wouldn't like a little coffee? Ma asked helplessly. No, thank you. Jessie took charge. We gonna show you about the sanitary unit first, and then if you wanna, we'll sign you up in the ladies' club and give you duty. Course you don't have to join. Does it cost much? Don't cost nothing but work. And when you're knowed, maybe you can be elected to this committee, Annie interrupted. Jessie, here, is on the committee for the whole camp. She's a big committee lady. Jessie smiled with pride. Elected unanimous, she said. Well, Miss Jode, I guess it's time we tell you about how the camp runs. Ma said, this here's my girl, Rosa Sharn. How do, they said. Better come along too. The huge Jessie spoke, and her manner was full of dignity and kindness, and her speech was rehearsed. You shouldn't think we're a button into your business, Miss Jode. This here camp got a lot of stuff everybody uses. And we got rules we made ourself. Now we're going to the unit that there, everybody uses, and everybody got to take care of it. They strolled to the unroofed section where the wash trays were, 20 of them. 8 were in use, the women bending over, scrubbing the clothes, and the piles of wrung-out clothes were heaped on the clean concrete floor. Now you can use these here anytime you want, Jessie said. The only thing is, you got to leave 'em clean. The women who were washing looked up with interest. Jessie said loudly, this here's Miss Jode and Rosa Sharn, came to live. They greeted Ma in a chorus and Ma made a dumpy little bow at them and said, proud to meet ya. Jessie led the committee into the toilet and shower room. I've been here already, Ma said. I even took a bath. That's what they're for, Jessie said. And they's the same rule. You got to leave 'em clean. Every week they's a new committee to swab out once a day. Maybe you get on that committee. You got to bring your own soap. We got to get some soap, Ma said. We're all out. Jessie's voice became almost reverential. You ever used this here kind? She asked, and pointed to the toilets. Yes, ma'am. Right this mornin'. Jessie sighed. That's good. Ella Summers said, just last week. Jessie interrupted sternly, Miss Summers, I'll tell. Ella gave ground. Oh, all right. Jessie said, last week, when you was chair, you done it all. I'll thank you to keep out this week. Well, tell what that lady done, Ella said. Well, said Jessie, it ain't this committee's business to go babblin', but I won't pass no names. Lady come in last week, and she got in here 'fore the committee got to her. And she had her old man's pants in the toilet, and she says, it's too low, and it ain't big enough. Bust your back over her, she says. Why couldn't they stick her higher? The committee smiled superior smiles. Ella broke in, says, can't put enough in at once. And Ella weathered Jessie's stern glance. Jessie said, we got our troubles with toilet paper. Rule says you can't take none away from here. She clicked her tongue sharply. Whole camp chips in for toilet paper. For a moment she was silent, and then she confessed, number 4 is using more than any other. Somebody's stealin' it. Come up in general ladies' meetin'. Ladies sighed, unit number 4 is using too much. Come right up in meetin'. Ma was following the conversation breathlessly. Stealin' it, what for? Well, said Jessie, we had trouble before. Last time they was 3 little girls cuttin' paper dolls out of it. Well, we caught them. But this time we don't know. Hardly put a roll out 'fore it's gone. Come right up in meetin'. One lady says we oughta have a little bell that rings every time the roll turns once. Then we could count how many everybody takes. She shook her head. I just don't know, she said. I've been worried all week. Somebody's stealing toilet paper from Unit 4. From the doorway came the whining voice, Miss Bullitt. The committee turned. Miss Bullitt, I heard what you says. A flushed, perspiring woman stood in the doorway. I couldn't get up in meetin', Miss Bullitt. I just couldn't. They laughed or somepin'. What you talkin' about? Jessie advanced. Well, we all, maybe, it's us. But we ain't stealin', Miss Bullitt. Jessie advanced on her, and the perspiration beaded out on the flustery confessor. We can't help it, Miss Bullitt. Now you tell what you're tellin', Jessie said. This here unit's suffered a shame bout that toilet paper. All week, Miss Bullitt. We couldn't help it. You know I got 5 girls. What they been doin' with it? Jessie demanded ominously. Just usin' it. Hones, just usin' it. They ain't got the right. 4 or 5 sheets is enough. What's the matter them? The confessor bleated, skitters. All 5 of 'em. We been low on money. They ate green grapes. They all 5 got the howlin' skitters. Run out ever 10 minutes. She defended them, but they ain't stealin' it. Jessie sighed. You shoulda told, she said. You got to tell. Here's Unit 4 sufferin' shame 'cause you never told. Anybody can get the skitters. The meek voice whined, I just can't keep 'em from eatin' them green grapes. And they're gettin' worse all the time. Ella Summers burst out, the aid. She oughta get the aid. Ella Summers, Jessie said, I'm tellin' you for the last time, you ain't the chair. She turned back to the rattled little woman. Ain't you got no money, Miss Joyce? She looked ashamedly down. No, but we might get work any time. Now you haul up your head, Jessie said. That ain't no crime. You'd waltz right over to the Wed Patch store and get you some groceries. The camp got $20 credit there. You get yourself $5 worth. And you can pay it back to the Central Committee when you get work. Miss Joyce, you know that, she said sternly. How come you let your girls get hungry? We ain't never took no charity, Mrs. Joyce said. This ain't charity, and you know it, Jessie raged. We had all that out. They ain't no charity in this here camp. We won't have no charity. Now you waltz right over and get you some groceries, and you bring the slip to me. Mrs. Joyce said timidly, S'pose we can't never pay? We ain't had work for a long time. You'll pay if you can. If you can't, that ain't none of our business, and it ain't your business. One fellow went away, and 2 months later he sent back the money. You ain't got the right to let your girls get hungry in this here camp. Mrs. Joyce was cowed. Yes, ma'am, she said. Get you some cheese for them girls, Jessie ordered. That'll take care of them skitters. Yes, ma'am. And Mrs. Joyce scuttled out of the door. Jessie turned in anger on the committee. She got no right to be stiff-necked. She got no right, not with our own people. Annie Littlefield said, she ain't been here long. Maybe she don't know. Maybe she's took charity one time another. Now, Annie said, don't you try to shut me up, Jessie. I got a right to pass speech. She turned half to Ma. If a body's ever took charity, it makes a burn that don't come out. This ain't charity, but if you ever took it, you don't forget it. I bet Jessie ain't ever done it. No, I ain't, said Jessie. Well, I did, Annie said. Last winter, and we was a starvine, me and Pa and the little fellas. And it was rainin'. Fella told us to go to the Salvation Army. Her eyes grew fierce. We was hungry, they made us crawl for our dinner. They took our dignity. I hate 'em. Anne, maybe Miss Joyce took charity. Maybe she didn't know this ain't charity. Miss Jode, we don't allow nobody in this camp to build theirself up that away. We don't allow nobody to give nothing to another person. They can give it to the camp, and the camp can pass it out. We won't have no charity. Her voice was fierce and hoarse. I hate 'em, she said. I ain't never seen my man beat before, but them Salvation Army done it to him. Jessie nodded. I heard, she said softly. I heard. We got to take Miss Jode around. Ma said, it sure is nice. Let's go to the sewing room, Annie suggested. Got 2 machines. They's a quiltin', and they're making dresses. You might like to work over there. When the committee called on Ma, Ruthie and Winfield faded imperceptibly back out of reach. "Why'n't we go along and listen?" Winfield asked. Ruthie gripped his arm. "No," she said. "We got washed for them sons of bitches. I ain't goin' with them." Winfield said, "You tall on me 'bout the toilet. I'm gonna tell what you called them ladies." A shadow of fear crossed Ruthie's face. "Don, do it." "I tall 'cause I knowed you didn't really break it." "You did not," said Winfield. Ruthie said, "Let's look around." They strolled down the line of tents, peering into each one, gawking self-consciously. At the end of the unit there was a level place on which a croquet court had been set up. Half a dozen children played seriously. In front of a tent an elderly lady sat on a bench and watched. Ruthie and Winfield broke into a trot. "Leave us play," Ruthie cried. "Leave us get in." The children looked up. A pigtailed little girl said, "Next game you kin." "I want to play now," Ruthie cried. "Well, you can't. Not till next game." Ruthie moved menacingly out on the court. "I'm gonna play." The pigtails gripped her mallet tightly. Ruthie sprang at her, slapped her, pushed her, and wrested the mallet from her hands. "I says I was gonna play," she said triumphantly. The elderly lady stood up and walked onto the court. Ruthie scowled fiercely and her hands tightened on the mallet. The lady said, "Let her play, like you done with Ralph last week." The children laid their mallets on the ground and trooped silently off the court. They stood at a distance and looked on with expressionless eyes. Ruthie watched them go. Then she hit a ball and ran after it. "Come on, Winfield. Get a stick," she called. And then she looked in amazement. Winfield had joined the watching children, and he too looked at her with expressionless eyes. Defiantly she hit the ball again. She kicked up a great dust. She pretended to have a good time. And the children stood and watched. Ruthie lined up two balls and hit both of them, and she turned her back on the watching eyes, and then turned back. Suddenly she advanced on them, mallet in hand. "You come and play," she demanded. They moved silently back at her approach. For a moment she stared at them, and then she flung down the mallet and ran crying for home. The children walked back on the court. Pigtails said to Winfield, "You can get in the next game." The watching lady warned them, "When she comes back and wants to be decent, you let her. You was mean yourself, Amy." The game went on, while in the Jode tent Ruthie wept miserably. The truck moved along the beautiful roads, past orchards where the peaches were beginning to color, past vineyards with the clusters pale and green, under lines of walnut trees whose branches spread half across the road. At each entrance gate Al slowed, and at each gate there was a sign, "No help wanted. No trespassing." Al said, "Pa, they's bound to be work when them fruits gets ready. Funny place, they tell you they ain't no work for you ask 'em." He drove slowly on. Pa said, "Maybe we could go in anyways and ask if they know where they's any work." "Might do that." A man in blue overalls and a blue shirt walked along the edge of the road. Al pulled up beside him. "Hey, mister," Al said. "Know where they's any work?" The man stopped and grinned, and his mouth was vacant of front teeth. "No," he said. "Do you?" "I been walkin' all week, and I can't tree none." "Live in that government camp?" Al asked. "Yeah." "Come on, then. Get up back, and we'll all look." The man climbed over the sideboards and dropped in the bed. Pa said, "I ain't got no hunch we'll find work. Guess we got to look, though. We don't even know where to look." "Shoulda talked to the fellas in the camp," Al said. "How you feelin', Uncle John?" "I ache," said Uncle John. "I ache all over, and I got it comin'. I ought to go away where I won't bring down punishment on my own folks." Pa put his hand on John's knee. "Look here," he said, "Don, you go away. We're droppin' folks all the time, Grandpa and Grandma dead, Noah and Connie, run out, and the preacher, in jail." "I got a hunch we'll see that preacher again," John said. Al fingered the ball on the gearshift lever. "You don't feel good enough to have no hunches," he said. "The hell with it. Let's go back and talk, and find out where they some work. Where'd you huntin' skunks underwater? He stopped the truck and leaned out the window and called back, "Hey. Looky. We're goin' back to the camp and try and see where they's work. They ain't no use burnin' gas like this." The man leaned over the truck side. "Suits me," he said. "My dogs is wore clean up to the ankle. And I ain't even got a nibble." Al turned around in the middle of the road and headed back. Pa said, "Ma's gonna be purty hurt, 'specially when Tom got work so easy." "Maybe he never got none," Al said. "Maybe he went lookin', too. I wished I could get work in a garage. I'd learn that stuff quick, and I'd like it." Pa grunted, and they drove back toward the camp in silence. When the committee left, Ma sat down on a box in front of the Jode tent, and she looked helplessly at Rose of Sharon. "Well," she said, "well, I ain't been so perked up in years. Wasn't them ladies nice?" "I get to work in the nursery," Rose of Sharon said. "They tell me. I can find out all how to do for babies, and then I'll know." Ma nodded in wonder. "Wouldn't it be nice if the men folks all got work?" she asked. "Them may workin', and a little money comin' in?" Her eyes wandered into space. "Them may workin', and us a workin' here, and all them nice people. Fust thing we get a little ahead I'd get me a little stove, nice one. They don't cost much. And then we'd get a tent, big enough, and maybe second-hand springs for the beds. And we'd use this here tent to eat under. On Saturday night we'll go to the dancin'. They says you can invite folks if you want. I wished we had some friends to invite. Maybe the men'll know somebody to invite." Rose of Sharon peered down the road. "That lady that says I'll lose the baby," she began. "Now you stop that," Ma warned her. Rose of Sharon said softly, "I seen her. She's a comin' here, I think. Yeah. Here she comes. Ma, don't let her." Ma turned and looked at the approaching figure. "Howdy," the woman said. "I'm Miss Sandry, Lisbeth Sandry. I seen your girl this mornin'." "Howdy do," said Ma. "Are you happy in the Lord?" "Pretty happy," said Ma. "Are you saved?" "I been saved." Ma's face was closed and waiting. "Well, I'm glad," Lisbeth said. "The sinners is awful strong around here. You come to an awful place. They's wickedness all around about. Wicked people, wicked goin's on that a lamb blood Christians can't hardly stand. They's sinners all around us." Ma colored a little, and shut her mouth tightly. "Seems to me they's nice people here," she said shortly. Mrs. Sandry's eyes stared. "Nice?" she cried. "You think they're nice when they's dancin' and hun? I tell ya, eternal soul ain't got a chance at in this here camp. Went out to a meetin' in Wedpatch last night. Know what the preacher says? He says, they's wickedness in that camp. He says, the poor is tryin' to be rich. He says, they's dancin' and hine when they should be wailin' and moanin' in sin. That's what he says. Everybody that ain't here is a black sinner, he says. I tell you it made a person feel pretty good to hear him. And we knowed we was safe. We ain't danced." Ma's face was red. She stood up slowly and faced Mrs. Sandry. "Git," she said. "Get out now, 'fore I get to be a sinner a tellin' you where to go. Get to your wailin' and moanin'." Mrs. Sandry's mouth dropped open. She stepped back. And then she became fierce. "I thought you was Christians." "So we are," Ma said. "No, you ain't. You're hell-burnin' sinners, all of you. And I'll mention it in meetin' too. I can see your black soul a-burnin'. I can see that innocent child in that there girl's belly a-burnin'." A low wailing cry escaped from Rose of Sharon's lips. Ma stooped down and picked up a stick of wood. "Git," she said coldly. "Don you never come back. I seen your kind before. You'd take the little pleasure, wouldn't you?" Ma advanced on Mrs. Sandry. For a moment the woman backed away and then suddenly she threw back her head and howled. Her eyes rolled up, her shoulders and arms flopped loosely at her side, and a string of thick ropey saliva ran from the corner of her mouth. She howled again and again, long deep animal howls. Men and women ran up from the other tents, and they stood near, frightened and quiet. Slowly the woman sank to her knees and the howls sank to a shuddering, bubbling moan. She fell sideways and her arms and legs twitched. The white eyeballs showed under the open eyelids. A man said softly, "The spirit." She got the spirit. Ma stood looking down at the twitching form. The little manager strolled up casually. "Trouble?" he asked. The crowd parted to let him through. He looked down at the woman. "Too bad," he said. "Will some of you help get her back to her tent?" The silent people shuffled their feet. Two men bent over and lifted the woman, one held her under the arms and the other took her feet. They carried her away, and the people moved slowly after them. Rose of Sharon went under the tarpaulin and lay down and covered her face with a blanket. The manager looked at Ma, looked down at the stick in her hand. He smiled tiredly. "Did you clout her?" he asked. Ma continued to stare after the retreating people. She shook her head slowly. "No, but I would. Twice it today she worked my girl up." The manager said, "Try not to hit her. She isn't well. She just isn't well." And he added softly, "I wish she'd go away, and all her family. She brings more trouble on the camp than all the rest together." Ma got herself in hand again. "If she comes back, I might hit her. I ain't sure. I won't let her worry my girl no more." "Don't worry about it, Mrs. Joad," he said. "You won't ever see her again. She works over the newcomers. She won't ever come back. She thinks you're a sinner." "Well, I am," said Ma. "Sure. Everybody is, but not the way she means. She isn't well, Mrs. Joad." Ma looked at him gratefully, and she called, "You hear that, Rosa Sharon? She ain't well. She's crazy." But the girl did not raise her head. Ma said, "I'm warnin' you, mister. If she comes back, I ain't to be trusted. I'll hit her." He smiled wryly. "I know how you feel," he said. "But just try not to. That's all I ask, just try not to." He walked slowly away toward the tent where Mrs. Sandry had been carried. Ma went into the tent and sat down beside Rose of Sharon. "Look up," she said. The girl lay still. Ma gently lifted the blanket from her daughter's face. "That woman's kinda crazy," she said. "Don't you believe none of them things." Rose of Sharon whispered in terror, when she said about burnin', "I felt burnin'." "That ain't true," said Ma. "I'm tired out," the girl whispered. "I'm tired of things happenin'. I want to sleep. I want to sleep." "Well, you sleep, then. This here's a nice place. You can sleep. But she might come back." "She won't," said Ma. "I'm gonna set right outside, and I won't let her come back. Rease up now, 'cause you got to get to work in the nursery pretty soon." Ma struggled to her feet and went to sit in the entrance to the tent. She sat on a box and put her elbows on her knees and her chin in her cupped hands. She saw the movement in the camp, heard the voices of the children, the hammering of an iron rim, but her eyes were staring ahead of her. Pa, coming back along the road, found her there, and he squatted near her. She looked slowly over at him. "Get work?" she asked. "No," he said, ashamed. "We looked. Where's Al and John and the truck?" "Al's fixin' somethin'. Had Tabori some tools. Fella says Al got to fix her there." Ma said sadly, "This here's a nice place. We could be happy here a while. If we could get work." "Yeah. If you could get work." He felt her sadness, and studied her face. "What you mopin' about? If it's such a nice place, why have you got to mope?" She gazed at him, and she closed her eyes slowly. "Funny, ain't it? All the time we was movin' and shovin', I never thought none. And now these here folks been nice to me, been awful nice, and what's the first thing I do? I go right back over the sad things. That night Grandpa died and we buried him. I was all full up of the road, and bumpin' and movin', and it wasn't so bad. But now I come out here, and it's worse now. And Grandma, and Noah walkin' away like that. Walkin' away due down the river. Them things was part of all, and now they come flockin' back. Grandma a pauper, unburied a pauper. That's sharp now. That's awful sharp. And Noah walking away down the river. He don't know what's there. He Jew don't know. And we don't know. We ain't never gonna know if he's alive or dead. Never gonna know. Connie sneaking away. I didn't give 'em brain room before, but now they're a flocking back. And I ought to be glad 'cause we're in a nice place. Pa watched her mouth while she talked. Her eyes were closed. I can remember how the mountains was, sharp as old teeth beside the river where Noah walked. I can remember how the stubble was on the ground where Grandpa lay. I can remember the chop and block back home with a feather caught on it, all crisscrossed with cuts, and black with chicken blood. Pa's voice took on her tone. I seen the ducks today, he said. Wedgin' south, high up. Seems like they're awful dinky. And I seen the blackbirds a sudden on the wires, and the doves was on the fences. Ma opened her eyes and looked at him. He went on, I seen a little whirlwind, like a man a spinnin' across the field. And the ducks drivin' on down, wedgin' on down to the southward. Ma smiled. Remember? She said. Remember what we'd always say at home? Winter's a comin' early, we said, when the ducks flew. Always said that, and winter come when it was ready to come. But we always said, she's a comin' early. I wonder what we meant. I seen the blackbirds on the wires, said Pa. Settin' so close together. And the doves. Nothin' sets so still as a dove, on the fence wires, maybe two, side by side. And this little whirlwind, big as a man, dancin' off across the field. Always did like the little fellas, big as a man. Wished I wouldn't think how it is home, said Ma. It ain't our home no more. Wished I'd forget it. And Noah. He wasn't ever right, I mean, well, it was my fault. I tol' you never to say that. Wouldna lived at all, maybe. But I shoulda knowed more. Now stop, said Ma. Noah was strange. Maybe he'll have a nice time by the river. Maybe it's better so. We can't do no worryin'. This here is a nice place, and maybe you'll get work right off. Pa pointed at the sky. Look, more ducks. Big bunch. And Ma, winter's a comin' early. She chuckled. They's things you do, and you don't know why. Here's John, said Pa. Come on and set, John. Uncle John joined them. He squatted down in front of Ma. We didn't get nowheres, he said. D'you run around? Say, Al wants to see ya. Says he got to get a tire. Only one layer of cloth left, he says. Pa stood up. I hope he can get her cheap. We ain't got much left. Where is Al? Down there, to the next cross street and turn right. Says gonna blow out and spoil a tube if we don't get a new one. Pa strolled away, and his eyes follow the giant V of ducks down the sky. Uncle John picked a stone from the ground and dropped it from his palm and picked it up again. He did not look at Ma. They ain't no work, he said. You didn't look all over, Ma said. No, but they's signs out. Well, Tom musta got work. He ain't been back. Uncle John suggested, maybe he went away, like Connie, or like Noah. Ma glanced sharply at him, and then her eyes softened. They's things you know, she said. They's stuff you're sure of. Tom's got work, and he'll come in this evenin'. That's true. She smiled in satisfaction. Ain't he a fine boy? She said. Ain't he a good boy? The cars and trucks began to come into the camp, and the men trooped by toward the sanitary unit. And each man carried clean overalls and shirt in his hand. Ma pulled herself together. John, you go find Pa. Get to the store. I want beans and sugar and a piece of frying meat and carrots and tell Pa to get something nice, anything, but nice, for tonight. Tonight, we'll have something nice.